Hi, Sakuntala, welcome. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, everybody. Welcome to the launch of the 2020 ANNI report on the performance of national human rights institution in Asia. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have prepared for all of us here a very insightful event, and especially in the week of the commemoration of International Human Rights Day, we are pleased to be able to have this event with all of you. My name is Julio Castor Achmadi. I'm the program officer of the National Human Rights Institution program in Forum Asia as the ANNI Secretariat. And we are very delighted to have all of you on board for this discussion. So ANNI is the Asian NGO Network on NHRIs, focuses to strengthen the work and functioning of NHRIs in Asia. We have members all across Asia who are the grassroots activists and human rights defenders on the ground who work on advocating for their own strengthening NHRI in their own country, as well as to improve their compliance with the Paris Principle as the bare minimum standard of an effective and also credible NHRI. So with us here, we have prepared a panel dialogue as well, and we have distinguished and honored speakers to be joining us for the next session. But before that, I would like to invite Forum Asia's Executive Director, Shamini Darshini Kalimutu, to give the opening remark and start this event. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Julio, and welcome everybody to the launch of the ANNI Report 2020. It's such a pleasure to have you here today. I'd also like to take this moment to thank our members with whom we have coordinated very closely with to produce this report. We would also like to extend our deepest thanks to the esteemed panelists for being with us today. As you may know, Forum Asia hosts the Secretariat of the Asian NGO Network on National Human Rights Institutions, or ANNI. This network is comprised of NGOs and human rights defenders who collaborate on issues relating to or with NHRIs across the Asian region. NHRIs are a key institution for the promotion and protection of human rights in Asia, yet they have faced various challenges in their ability to execute this mandate over the years. Consequently, the ANNI network was established with the aim of strengthening the role and workings of NHRIs in various ways. In countries where NHRIs exist, ANNI members monitor their performance in compliance with international standards such as the Paris Principles and advocate for improvement of their function. And in countries without NHRIs, ANNI works with key stakeholders to promote and facilitate their establishment. Since 2007, a key component of ANNI's work has been the production of the ANNI reports, which closely examine the performance of NHRIs in Asia. The research and findings contained in these reports are disseminated widely and used to ensure that ANNI members' advocacy work and interventions are relevant and effective. In recent years, the Asian region has witnessed a regression in the human rights situation. Authoritarianism has been on the rise, civic spaces continue to shrink, and activities of human rights defenders and CSOs continue to be significantly constrained. The COVID-19 pandemic has only exacerbated these trends over the past 2 years, and this has allowed governments to justify the use of repressive laws and measures in the name of security to manage a pandemic. This pandemic has also made it increasingly difficult for existing NHRIs to work independently and effectively to promote and protect human rights. And this has also made it further difficult to establish new NHRIs. As a result, the ANNI report dives deeply into the performance of 11 Asian NHRIs during the COVID-19 pandemic specifically, and explores their compliance with relevant international standards during these challenging times. A key assessment of the NHRIs in the ANNI Report 2020 is that during the COVID-19 pandemic, NHRIs have played an important role in responding to human rights situations in a highly restrictive environment in many countries. They have supported governments in the planning, implementation, and prevention of violation of the right to health, voiced their concerns on restrictions that affected the rights of the people, which were not aligned with international human rights standards, advocated for the rights of the marginalized groups, and developed innovative approaches to address the deterioration of human rights protection in many national contexts. Conversely, this report also shows us how many NHRIs have also failed to adequately address the impact of COVID-19 on human rights in various countries. Today, the ANNI Secretariat will deep dive in today's discussion. We will deep dive into this, presenting the report's key findings. This will then be followed by a panel discussion to share further reflections on the experience of conducting NHRI-related advocacy during the pandemic, lessons learned, setbacks faced, and good practices of NHRIs in Asia. Finally, we will open up the floor to Q&A. In conclusion, we hope that you will find the report and the subsequent discussions. I'm sorry, you just went big screen and I lost my notes. In conclusion, we hope that you will find the report and the subsequent discussions useful for your own activities to advance human rights across Asia. And we stand in solidarity with you towards this end. Allow me to put on record my deepest thanks, my extreme deepest thanks to the ANNI members who made this report possible. And a shout out also to Julio and Shomira from the NHRI program of Forum Asia for putting this together and bringing us together here today. With this, I am happy to launch the ANNI Report 2020 on behalf of Forum Asia. Once again, thank you for joining us today. Happy International Human Rights Day as well. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Shamini, for opening and also officially launching the ANNI Report 2020 on the performance of NHRIs in Asia. Everyone, we hope that by opening and also launching this document in particular, we can further strengthen the work and also the functioning of NHRIs in Asia as an ally to the human rights and also the civil society organization working to uphold human rights in Asia. Thank you so much, Shamini, for your time and also for the amazing opening remarks. We will now move on with our second agenda, which is on the presentation of key findings of the ANNI Report 2020. So for this, the ANNI Secretariat will be representing the whole family of ANNI to present the finding. Both Shomira and I will be doing that. So Shomira, please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. My name is Shomira and I work as the NHRI Program Associate at Forum Asia. And I'll be taking this forward with a presentation of our findings and reflections of the ANNI report based on all the chapters that have come in from our members to this end. Please allow me to share a screen where we will be showing our presentation. All right. So welcome once again to the 2020 ANNI report launch on the performance of the national human rights institutions in Asia. This is a biennial report which is prepared alongside our ANNI members in different countries in Asia on the performance of national human rights institutions and how they've been faring in one calendar year. This report was particularly challenging because it comes from the context of the pandemic and all the challenges that came to human rights and human rights violations that have occurred in this period. And we'll be addressing some of those very shortly. So for a brief context for our viewers who may not be as familiar with national human rights institutions and the Paris Principles, the Paris Principles are the international minimum standards for credible and effective national human rights institutions. NHRI's compliance with the Paris Principles is reviewed through a periodic accreditation process by the Subcommittee on Accreditation of the Global Alliance of National Human Rights Institutions, or GANRI. So this is a process which takes place periodically, and NHRIs are reviewed according to their performance. So if they are fully compliant with the Paris Principles, they are accorded an A status. And if they're not fully compliant or they are partially compliant, they are accorded with a B status. So it is in this context that the report is written. And going into the 6 different criteria for NHRIs, which are the Paris Principles, first and foremost, it is a clearly defined broad-based mandate that is based on international human rights standards. Secondly, it implies or it speaks about autonomy from the government for independent institutions to be able to work effectively. Other than that, it is also independence to this institution which exists in a country or wherever it exists, which is guaranteed by the law or the constitution. It should have pluralism in membership. So the membership of a national human rights institution should reflect the diversity of the society in which it is operating. Beyond that, an NHRI to function effectively, independently, and autonomously should have adequate resources. It requires resources to be able to implement its mandate in protecting and promoting human rights. And finally, an NHRI which is compliant with the Paris Principles, or which should strive to be compliant with the Paris Principles, should have adequate powers of investigation. It's a point to note that national human rights institutions are unique institutions in the sense that they are neither the government nor are they civil society. They're a bridge between the two. And they occupy a very important place in ensuring that there is fairness, there is justice, and that human rights violations across a country or a particular context are addressed adequately and in a just and fair manner. Moving on, we'd like to come to the NHRIs that we've covered in the 2020 ANNI report this year. So this year we had 11 countries and NHRIs, which are across South, Southeast, and East Asia. So for the countries that have been covered in this report, we've covered Pakistan, India, Nepal, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Taiwan, and South Korea. And it gives us great pleasure that our members, a lot of our members are on today's panel who have written these reports for us or who have contributed for many years to the ANNI report. So it's a great honor and privilege to have them on the panel and also in the participants. And you'll be hearing more from them about what their experiences were in the year that the ANNI report covers. Finally, we'll move into the methodology that was adopted for the ANNI report. So we'd like to state that the ANNI report is a civil society assessment of the performance of NHRIs, which is led by ANNI members. In this case, it was ANNI members in 11 countries. And this information is collected from their work and experience on conducting NHRI advocacy in their respective countries. This is something that our members have been doing for several years. And the ANNI report is shaped by their keen observations and reflections on how the NHRIs are performing, whether they've had a good year or not so good year, and what they could be doing to make it better for human rights situation in their country. Our report structure talks about an overview of the NHRI. It gives important facts for the NHRI. We wanted the report to be accessible to a larger audience. So if there's someone who wants to read more about what they can do to contact their NHRI in their country, what do they need to know about their NHRI, this would be a fact sheet at the beginning of every chapter, every country chapter. Because this is covering a very difficult year, the 2020 period, we cannot ignore the fact that there was a pandemic which struck the world this year, and the grave impact that it had on human rights and human rights violations that occurred because of it. So we've covered the human rights situation during the COVID-19 pandemic in all of the countries that we've been covering in this report. The next part of the report involves, the authors have written about 3 broad Paris Principle criteria that they have felt were important or the most relevant to their NHRI. And they focused on talking about these. So if we can recap a bit, I've spoken about the 6 different Paris Principles, and from that, members have chosen to write about some of the most grave or relevant issues, but not just the challenges, and also including good practices or something that their NHRI has done, which has contributed positively to ensuring human rights for all. This assessment, we would like to say, is drawn from an index that was developed to measure the performance of NHRIs. It continues to be in development and practice, and we are fine-tuning this in the process. So these reflections are drawn from members' objective evaluations on what the NHRIs have done or not done to address human rights in their country in this year. We do understand that there are certain limitations when we are covering the report. So as of today, we do have, of course, 11 countries. There are more countries in Asia which do have NHRIs. However, there were certain challenges owing to either the political turmoil that was happening in certain countries, or it was difficult for people to put in reports. And we understand that has come through a lot of challenges with the COVID-19 pandemic. It's not just affected the NHRIs, but it's also affected civil society as well in the work that we're doing. It's taken a lot of a toll on everyone in conducting their work, and we would like to acknowledge that. Thank you to our members who have submitted their reports. Talking of the COVID-19 pandemic, it's also affected NHRIs very strongly, which is what we will be covering in this report. It's impeded their work in terms of either resources or the availability of staff, and how they have been able or not to carry out their work independently during this period. Finally, there are some keen observations on undertaking a gender-sensitive approach to assessing NHRIs. We do find that a lot of the constitutional laws don't adequately address gender, or that there is diversity that is missing in reporting or in terms of the membership. And we think that there is a great scope for NHRIs to be focusing on this in the coming years as well. So this would be a recommendation, a suggestion, and an observation from the ANNI Secretariat in moving forward. Moving on, the human rights situation in the 11 countries that were covered. This is a broad overview of the different trends that we have noticed as part of this report. So first and foremost, we've witnessed that there have been serious setbacks to democracy and the rule of law. This period has seen a lot of governments bringing in very repressive laws in the name of COVID-19 measures. And these laws have curtailed the freedom of people in terms of freedom of expression or assembly or other rights and freedoms that they enjoy. And the democratic spaces are certainly shrinking in the region. Other than this, there have been major political developments during the pandemic in several Asian countries, which has changed the landscape of the human rights situation in the region. And these are important challenges, important political developments that we understand will have larger implications for the region. Other than this, when we speak specifically about the COVID-19 pandemic, there has been a huge increase in human rights violations during the COVID-19 pandemic. Some of these, of course, have had to do with the way repressive laws have applied. But then beyond that, vulnerable populations we found have been most affected. This would include women, children, the LGBTIQ community, persons with disabilities, the elderly, refugees, and migrants. We've seen a rise in xenophobic treatment of migrants. We've seen refugee rights being curtailed, or refugees not having the adequate protections. And of course, the LGBTIQ community has also continued to be persecuted in this process. So these are some of the reflections that we have found from our ANNI report. In this year, from January to October 2020, Forum Asia documented several cases of human rights defenders and violations that have happened in this period. So there were 525 cases of human rights violations against human rights defenders across 22 Asian countries, and which broadly affected 1,305 human rights defenders. These are very strong numbers which are coming in regarding the situation of human rights. And we're going to move forward to talk about some of the larger trends which have been witnessed as a part of this process. I hand it over to my colleague Julio to take it further. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shomira. So I will continue. As mentioned before by Shomira, we have seen a shrinking civic space in the region, in the whole Asia region. But in here, we have tried to highlight three instances in three different countries. So we have here Bangladesh, Indonesia, and also India. So in Bangladesh, we have documented that there is a declining press freedom because of the usage of Draconian Digital Security Act that sue journalists who reported on alleged embezzlement of aid for COVID-19 victims. So when these journalists as a human rights defenders themselves are promoting the right to information, they were being sued under the Digital Security Act, which has been very problematic in Bangladesh. So this lawsuit has contributed to the deterioration of a healthy journalism due to the usage of repressive media laws other than the Digital Security Act as well. And then it stifled the journalist by making it a legal process. It is considered as a judicial harassment towards the journalist. And then finally, the government used the pretext of prevention of rumors and also misinformation as their justification to stifle these journalists. Moving to Indonesia, we have here an enactment of several problematic laws. The first one that has been a huge blow to democracy as well as human rights situation in Indonesia was the rapid enactment of the problematic omnibus law on job creation, as well as several actually police telegrams. One of them was to sweep the critics directed towards the government on social media. So during the process of the protest against the omnibus law on job creation, there were hundreds to even thousands of protesters arrested across Indonesia. And during this protest, we have documented an excessive force of police used throughout the management of the protests. So there were a lot of arrest, a lot of detention, a lot of using of water cannon, and also tear gas throughout the process against the peaceful protesters as well. And finally, the police was one of the perpetrator of human rights violation through one of their telegram as well. They took action against the social media post that insults the president and official state institution. This, of course, curtails the freedom of expression, especially in the digital realm. And now, at the moment, because we're in the COVID-19 situation, the people were not free to be able to go and take the street, and rather they took on the protest as well as their expression on the digital platform. And they have seen repercussions from that practice of freedom of expression as well. Moving to India, we have seen as well violations of freedom of expression as well as assembly and of association through the usage of repressive laws such as the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, as well as the National Security Act. So we see the pattern here that the government tries to stifle dissent using the national security as their justification. The usage of these repressive laws has caused at least 9 students being arrested during the protest against Citizen Amendment Act 2019, in which they were labeled as terrorists as well as insurgents to justify the arrest. And finally, the civil society in India have also monitored and also noticed that the hate speech and also violence against these protesters in particular were left overlooked. They were unaddressed, especially by the government and also the authorities. Please move on to the next slide. Thank you. In the period of 2020 as well, we have seen a growing violence against human rights defenders and also women human rights defenders. So here we have prepared 3 indicators why we have mentioned that there has been a growing violence. So the first one is related to the judicial harassment caused by draconian and repressive laws again. In Pakistan, we have seen that harassment as well as prosecution of human rights defenders, including lawyers and journalists, have been done for criticizing the government or officials and also the policies using the sedition and counterterrorism laws. In Malaysia, also the usage of Sedition Act as well as Communication and Multimedia Act to stifle dissent. And moving on to the digital attacks and also threats. This is an evolving pattern that we see because most of the work that have been done previously offline have shifted towards an online manner. So we have seen a change of attack patterns as well that is now including into the digital platform. So in Indonesia, our ANNI members have managed to document the hacking or attempted hacking of social media accounts of human rights defenders, whether it is an individual activist or an organization, let's say their website. especially if they were protesting against the government's officials and as well as the policies. So we have seen the hacking of websites. Some organizations have not been able to open their websites because of this hacking as well. And in Thailand, we have seen a case of Anchan, a woman who was sentenced to a 43 years and 6 months prison time because she posted an audio clip which was deemed to have insulted the monarchy. This was used using the Less than Majesty law, which was also protested by the Thailand democracy movement back then. Number 3 is the increasing cases of women human rights defenders and LGBTQIQ human rights defenders. The oppression against these most vulnerable communities have been or have remained unaddressed as well. So in South Korea, there was a rising hatred against the Me Too movement. So a negative sentiment has been raised against the feminist movement after a case of sexual harassment in the prosecutor office has been unfolded. In Nepal, Sri Lanka, and also Myanmar, there has been an increased SGBV cases against women, girls, and also LGBTIQ community that has been left unaddressed. Please, next. So here we would like to highlight what were the NHRI's responses in Asia to address the human rights situation happening in several of the countries that are covered in the ANNI 2020 report. So first of all, in Pakistan. So the NCHR Pakistan, after the completion of their previous tenure of the first set of the commissioner back in 2019, it has remained non-functional because of the lack of political commitment, as well as the failure of the government to appoint the new set of commissions. And this has been a huge blow to the human rights situation and also for people who are working for the betterment of human rights in Pakistan, because the non-functioning of the NCHR means that there is one less access to justice provided by the victim of the human rights violation themselves. They are closed of having the remedy and also the resolution of their human rights cases. And in particular, the SGBV, sex and gender-based violence cases have spiked during these times, in which we have been informed that there were reports of cases of forced marriage, child marriage, and also abuse, honor killings, and also a spike in the domestic violence occurring in the household during this COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. Moving on to the Mnhrc in Myanmar. So we have noted and documented that ever since the attempted coup back in the February 2020, the February 2021, the situation has been even aggravated. But in 2020, we have seen that the Mnhrc has failed to denounce, and also they have become complicit in the military junta's widespread human rights violation. So the military has attacked indiscriminately the civilians objects, the schools, the homes, and religious sites, for example, throughout the attempt of the coup. And this has been left unaddressed at all by the Mnhrc, which has been a huge disappointment for the human rights organization and the civil society movement who were suffering in witnessing the human rights deterioration in Myanmar. And no investigations on national inquiries have been made on this particular situation. The violence, especially the SGBV against the women and girls of the ethnic minorities in Myanmar, have also been left overlooked by the Mnhrc. And then they have also refused to investigate the widespread allegations of the genocide of Rohingya community, the crimes against humanity, war crimes, and other forms of human rights violations that are happening at the moment as well in Myanmar. The CSOs have documented that the Mnhrc painted a rosy picture of the government, their performance as well on addressing human rights violations. So it is not according to the fact on the ground, especially, let's say, we see at their latest UPR submission, they have actually appreciated the work of the military, which was not in accordance with any international human rights standards, as well as the national standards of human rights situation. Moving to the last institution, which is the NHRC Taiwan. So NHRC Taiwan was one of the most youngest NHRI in Asia, and it has been established back in August 2020. So it has been only 1 year ever since their first being established. Within this first year, our ANNI members in Taiwan have addressed some problematic areas, including the independence of the NHRC, which has raised many questions because they are under the control Yen, which is the ombudsman of Taiwan. And now they are having the dual personality as both ombudsman as well as the National Human Rights Institution. Of course, this is not something new, and this has been a practice in several other countries. But during the first year, our members in Taiwan have noticed that there has been no clear information about the division of work and functioning of the NHRC with the control Yen. For example, the chairperson of the current NHRC is also the president of the control Yen, and this raised an issue whether the NHRC will be able to fulfill its mandate as a separate institution, which has their own work and their own functions in working on the promotion and also protection of human rights in Taiwan. These slides, we try to address and also acknowledge several good practices that have been conducted by 3 NHRIs in the region. So the first one is in SUARAM, Malaysia. So SUARAM has conducted a needs assessment on the most vulnerable group, such as refugees, undocumented migrants as well during COVID-19. This has been one of the good practices that have been conducted by NHRIs in Asia in order to address the different level or different layer of discrimination, as well as potential risk against these vulnerable communities during COVID-19. And then SUARAM has also shown a more prominent involvement in the sexual harassment bill, as well as the anti-discrimination against women bill in Malaysia. Of course, it has been something that were advocated by the CSOs in Malaysia for many years, and their involvement will need to be further analyzed on their effectiveness, as well as the role of the NHRI in this type of promotion, as well as involvement in the enactment of more progressive laws on protection against women. In the NHRCK, the South Korea, they have advocated on a case of a trans women staff surgeon who was being discriminated against. So this has been a good example of an advocacy about the protection and also non-discriminatory behavior by the government toward LGBTIQ people, and then the community as well in the region. Because we have seen that discrimination are still happening throughout the region, whether it is based on discriminatory laws or just based on the patriarchal culture that has run deep into the society, as well as the bodies of the government, which has been institutionalized. And then the NHRCK has also actively worked on its promotion mandate by holding conferences on various human rights topics. This shows that they have working actively on their promotional mandate, which is a good thing. And lastly, we have noted that the NHRC and Nepal has urged the government to immediately evacuate the Nepali nationals from Wuhan, China, during the very beginning of the pandemic. So this shows a swift response and also a tactical response to the prevention of violation of the right to health of the Nepali nationals. And then finally, and also in regards to the impact of COVID towards the human rights situation in Nepal, the NHRCN has consulted with CSOs in conducting monitoring on human rights situation, which has contributed to the reduced marginalization and risk of potential violations during the pandemic. So everyone, we are now at the last slide of the presentation of the findings, which is the conclusion. So based on the findings, the work of our members who have made a huge effort in documenting the performance of NHRIs in Asia, we see that the work of NHRIs is still relevant. And should they are fully compliant with the Paris principles or even beyond, in the way that they manage to see that some mandates that are not existent at the moment can be worked on by working, let's say, with another organization, by establishing a new legislation that can work on that specific gaps, they could change the landscape of human rights situation in Asia, because the NHRI function is also becoming the bridge of the CSOs and the government They have roles in the regional and also international level despite of their functioning international context. So we see their relevance in the upcoming years as well to be better support the promotion, also protection for human rights in Asia. The ANNI recognizes the good practices and also the efforts made by many NHRIs in the region to better promote and protect human rights. But also we're going to continuously criticize along with our members who are working closely with the NHRI in respective country. We're going to criticize and remain critical about the stances, the work, and also the decision made by the NHRIs in every level, including the local, national, regional, and also international. NHRI's independence has been a major factor in their functioning, as we have seen, especially in the face of political turmoils. What we have been able to document from this report is that many NHRIs has compromised their independence, or rather leave their independence because of the political turmoils that have happened in several countries. And these have become a major concern for the CSOs because it is the same as they are not being able to address human rights violation, especially if it's conducted by the state, and thus prolonging or sustaining the impunity culture that is happening in many countries throughout Asia. So we expect that the NHRIs can maintain and also strengthen their independence, especially in times of a drastic political development in many Asian countries. And lastly, we encourage and also expect that the meaningful and also inclusive engagement with CSOs, including all of the ANNI members and also ANNI Secretariat and the other relevant stakeholders in local, national level, should be strengthened as the core of an effective and credible institution to uphold human rights in the region. So everyone, thank you so much for your attention in the presentation of the findings of the ANNI report 2020. After this, we will directly have a discussion with our distinguished panelists, and I will pass the floor to Shomira.
Thank you so much. I think this sets the tone for the discussion that we're going to have right now. We have invited a panel of course, our ANNI members, but we also have representation from Komnas, which is the Indonesian NHRI. We have Mr. Damanik with us here today. And our other panelists are Dr. Sakuntala Kadirgamar from Sri Lanka, Kenneth Cheng from Malaysia, Thanarat Deejantuek from Thailand, and Hyun-Phil from Korea. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. It's a great pleasure and honor to be with all of you and to speak with you about the work that you've put into making this report possible. I think we can start off the panel discussion. First of all, Dr. Sakuntala, we would be going forward with you first in this panel discussion. So Dr. Sakuntala is the Executive Director of LST from Sri Lanka. And she's been very closely associated with ANNI and Forum Asia for a really long time. So it will be very nice to hear her reflections, because in 2020, there were a lot of, it was a very difficult year for everyone, of course, but in Sri Lanka, there were major constitutional changes. There was also the pandemic, and it would be great to hear from Dr. Sakuntala if you could tell us what impact these, these circumstances, these political changes have had on the functioning of the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka. Could you please share more with us about the challenges in 2020 and what this means for human rights in Sri Lanka moving forward? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Shomira. Thank you for giving me and LST this opportunity to be part of this human rights community that are reviewing the respective national human rights commissions. I think we point out that we are doing this in the spirit of engagement to improve the quality of our human rights commissions. And even though we are often considered to be anti-national and overcritical, it is with the intention of making life better for the citizens of our respective countries. Yes, 2020 has been a very difficult year for us. quite apart from the pandemic and the economic crisis that we are in. Of course, it's also important to recognize that, we can't assess the Human Rights Commission in a vacuum. It's part of an architecture of democratic institutions that are under siege at this moment. We were very proud as Sri Lankans that our Human Rights Commission had got A status within 2.5 years of its inception. It's easy to degrade an institution. It's very difficult to build it up. And this is what the Commission did. Thanks to the 19th Amendment to the Constitution, after an election, which promised good governance, efforts were made to really rebuild our political institutions and rebalance them in the favor of democracy. And the 19th Amendment to the Constitution ensured that a president's powers, executive powers, were constrained. The president didn't have unlimited term limits that he could run. The independent institutions were strengthened. A constitutional council, which was impartial and representative of many parliamentary factions, was established to be able to make appointments, recommend, and in some cases almost do the fundamental selection of key institutions, and the Human Rights Commission was one of them. The courts to the judiciary, the president had to have the selection of judges approved by the Constitutional Council. So all these institutions and measures gave people a confidence that it wouldn't be partisan political appointments. And this was very heartening. Of course, in spite of all this, there were challenges because that government that brought these measures in was a coalition government, and they survived because of they were the least common denominator. They got together to upend an existing government, but they didn't agree on many aspects of the democratization projects, and there were tensions, and we were not able to make the advances we anticipated. The coalition also fell apart quite quickly, but as a result of the coalition, the flounderings in 2019, the presidential elections were held, and Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa was elected, and he is a strong-arm, military-minded person. So with his election, it was very clear as to the direction that the country would go. And that election was followed by a parliamentary election where his brother became the prime minister. And once they had this very strong the coalition between the executive and the prime minister's office, it was very clear that there were going to be many changes. Consequently, the 20th Amendment that was brought in pretty much rolled back all the advantages and gains made by the 19th Amendment and introduced some additional problems as well. So this was, just hold on for a minute, please. There's a background disturbance. I'm sorry, there's a background disturbance. These are the challenges of Zoom calls at home. So there were many changes brought in, and the 20th Amendment, while it rolled back, while it maintained the term limits for the president, it re-centralized power in the presidency. It eliminated the Constitutional Council, set up a parliamentary council that was purely advisory. And in fact, it even abolished two commissions, the Audit Commission and Procurement Commission. What does that tell you about where your country is going when they don't have an Audit Commission and a Procurement Commission? So the terms of the 20th Amendment was that the Human Rights Commission and others would continue for the lifetime of their term unless there were resignations, deaths, and people were replaced. So that sort of Damocles also held over this commission. The Human Rights Commission also had gone through some changes because there were some resignations for personal reasons by two commissioners. Those positions were not filled under the terms of the Constitutional Commission. It was a wait and see game till the 20th Amendment was consolidated, and once that was consolidated, new appointments were made for the Human Rights Commission pretty much at the end of the year in December. And there were some commissioners who still, their terms had not run out, but by this constitution of a new commission, they ceased to exist. So in that context, you can see that there is no commitment. This Human Rights Commission was also established in a context where Sri Lanka has withdrawn from the UN Resolution 31 that it had co-sponsored. So that's another salvo against human rights. There has been an increased the surveillance and anti-human rights measures that have been brought in. And we have to recognize that in Sri Lanka, there was a bombing, the Easter Sunday bombings that took place in 2019. And these, in fact, were the precursor for the election of this present government. They promised security, strong-arm government, and that seems to be in the siren call that the population responded to. Now they have what they desired, and as Oscar Wilde said, be careful of what you want, because this is now the government is under a lot of strain because it uses the same strong-arm tactics to respond even to COVID measures, rather than being sympathetic towards people who are suffering from loss of employment, who are suffering from a failing health system. Their livelihoods are at stake, but the government has largely responded to COVID through law and order measures. There's increased militarization. The military is in control of many of the task forces. So they're not really listening to the needs of citizens. And as a result of it, they are very unpopular. They've also made measures which are very different to what we should be discussing here, but they decided to ban fertilizers and therefore have almost brought the farming industry to its knees. So in all this, there are many livelihoods issues, human rights violations in terms of livelihoods, in terms of security, militarization, and as a result of it, there is, I would say that we are a society in turmoil in many ways. And in this context, the Human Rights Commission now is not going to be very friendly towards its mandate. It's not going to be responsive to people's mandates. I think I mentioned that the commission was constituted in 2020, so we really can't hold them responsible for any of the actions that have taken place. And the commission that was on its way out was very, very clear that it was going to be marginalized in 2020. But now you have a situation where the chairman of the Human Rights Commission has already been replaced, the new commission, no explanations given. He resigned, but there's a lot of political gossip that he was asked to leave. So I think it's another institution, as it is in the region, that is crumbling. And if a human rights institution is to improve itself and be, strengthen itself, as we did in 2018 when we were given a status by Gandhi, you need 2, 3, 4 generations of a human rights institution functioning with strong leadership in an environment that is supportive of human rights, and only then does it really consolidate itself. So I think our institution now is unconsolidated and it's even deconstructing. But I'm a little optimistic because I think the COVID pandemic, for all the hardships that it has brought about, has also created a kind of political energy and anger amongst people. And of course, I mean, either they will respond en masse and be cut down in the process, or governments will have to respond to it. So I think the jury is a little out. I lose track on time, so you have to tell me if I have overspent my time, and I'm always willing to come back with other questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sakuntala. I think your presentation was wonderful because it also it's touching the surface of the tip of the iceberg in terms of the issues that NHRIs are facing today. It's a good reminder that it's a very fragile balance for sure. The independence is not something that we can take for granted. There are a lot of circumstances which are challenging these. I think the COVID-19 pandemic, of course, but also political changes. And I think that sets the tone for our next panelist as well. So thank you so much, Dr. Sakuntala. We do appreciate the positive note on which you're ending this presentation. And we're looking forward to working with you ahead in terms of NHRI-related advocacy in Sri Lanka. So thank you so much. Moving on, we have Thanarat from People's Empowerment Foundation in Thailand. He is a researcher and has contributed significantly to the Thailand report. So Thanarat, the floor is yours. We want to ask you about 2020, of course, I think, of course, in Thailand as well, there were a lot of political challenges. We've seen the pro-democracy protests, we've seen constitutional changes which are affecting the political situation, the situation for the NHRI to function. So along, of course, with COVID-19. So could you please share a bit more about this and also the role of the National Human Rights Commission of Thailand during this period? So thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Shomira. So I would like to share our Thai chapter report or the ANNI report. So I'm going to focus on the 5 main points, and I will start with the recommendation to the National Human Rights Commission of Thailand by Global Alliance of the National Human Rights Institution. The recommendations of GA/NHRI is that to remove or report correct facts without delay in case where there is an incorrect or unfair report on the human rights situation in Thailand. Next is the SCA encourage the NHRC to advocate for the conclusion of the appointment process in a timely manner to a transparent and participatory process as outlined in the law. And GA/NHRI's committees called SCA is also have a responsibility to encourage the NHRC to increase the monitoring and assessment of the human rights situation, being more than just offer. The last responsibility of the GA/NHRI is to receive the complaints that is the inefficiency and slows. Now let's move to the next topic. The next topic is the NHRC has a major change of the coup because the enforcement of the new constitutionals, including an organic acts of the National Human Rights Commission of Thailand, in which both papers were written by the Kumichai Vichupan, which both of them did not undergo democratic process. While the referendums head up, there are 13 people who ran the campaigns forward no on the said referendum was analyzed by the Thai police. So let's next to the next topic. Even if the third month of NHRC is terminated, there will still serve their deputy as an NHRC until the new constitutionals would be enforced. During the defensive duty, many of them resided, some of them decided to resign because of their independence. And the first month of NHRC has been directed by the selection committee, but the biggest problem is after passing the selections, they must be certificated by 250 senators. All of them are appointed by the NCPO through a closed process. The Thai citizens were unable to know the exact reasons of the votes by the 250 senators. Let's next to the topics. The NHRC appeared to engage only limited number of skate orders for purpose of its regional and international engagement, which also points to the lack of awareness of the Commission activities more broadly. According to the budget in fiscal 2020, NHRC had recruited 276 staff. NHRC also receives annual budgets from the Parliament, allowed 247 million baht. Mostly the funding has been used to spend for human resource on the staff at the Commission, allowed 143 million baht, while spent for activity only 78 million baht. NHRC also expanded its organization structure by creating a new 12th condition center in 12 universities in Thailand. NHRC has had an acquired a resources to persist in activity, but its outcome seem continually intangible. Finally, the topic is in 2020, after 465 complaints, that the Commission received is considered only 286 of those rejection. The remaining 185 due to the inconsistence with the institution's authority based on interviews with CSOs. The institution, the NHRI House discretionary power to receive and reject complaints, but the lack of complaints and well-trained staff also harder to process of audits in case of human rights violation. And example case in the more recent case of Kun Anchan, she was sentenced to the 43 years and 6 months in prison under the legislative law for sharing audio clips from Deejantuek, which was being introduced to the monarchy, while the Commission should have play a role in assisting the victim. There has been no action from the National Human Rights, the Thai Human Rights Commissions. Okay, finally, the human rights situation in Thailand has worsened in 2020 and continue to decline. However, the NHRI has failed to seriously address the human rights violation in context of the pandemic and the mass protest calling constitutional amendments in the past year. The NHRI's independence is also presently created due to the fault in the appointment and selection process for human rights to be realized for all communities in Thailand. It is essential that this structure and institutional choice must be reformed. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Thanarat. I think, of course, moving on from Dr. Sakuntala's presentation and now yours, I think we're also talking about important challenges such as the selection and appointment process, all the other political challenges that have happened during this period. And thank you so much for your presentation. We encourage all our participants here today to take a look at the ANNI report, to read about the Thailand chapter, because the Thailand, the NHRCT has undergone a lot of changes as well in its constitution and in its membership in the last 2 years. So it has been quite a complicated time. There have been a lot of issues in this past year as well. Thank you so much, Thanarat, for presenting us an overview of the situation. And we're looking forward to working with you as well. Moving on, we would like to invite Mr. Ahmad Taufan Damanik, who is the chairperson of Komnas HAM, the NHRI of Indonesia, to share his perspectives. Thank you so much, Mr. Damanik, for being with us here today. In the spirit of fairness, we do want to call our colleagues from NHRIs to share their perspectives as well, to talk about what the pandemic has meant for them in terms of implementing their mandate. So if I may, we would love to hear from you more about Komnas HAM's experience during 2020 in implementing its mandate. This would be your achievements, your challenges, any good practices and reflections. And alongside that, a second question that we would hope that you can answer is, what is the role you see for Komnas HAM and other NHRIs in the region now that we are in a state of, the pandemic is ongoing, but the challenges it has thrown up. So what this means for the region, for Komnas HAM in the coming years, and what this also means for vulnerable groups. Thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Yeah. First of all, I would like to appreciate the report from ANNI. Even though I just received a report, I think in this morning, and have very limited time to scrutinize and reading it, because we have so many activities also for tomorrow. Tomorrow we'll have a celebration of International Human Rights Day in Presidential Palace with the President and other stakeholders of Indonesian human rights. And of course, in this moment, in this time, I would like to share you my perspective, especially on the context of Indonesia. I only have a few opinion on regional context, but in this time, I would like to more focus on Indonesian context. I would like to explain that we have, beside our Indonesian constitution, which is saying also about the human rights issue in article number 228, we have 4 national law giving mandate to Komnas HAM. National Human Rights Law number 39 That's the basic mandate of your Komnas HAM, that we have investigation mandate, and then mediation, and also research and education or socialization of human rights, or promotion of human rights. Yeah. 4 mandates, I think it is quite comprehensive. Yeah. I didn't know how you say that in this your report. You use a term of limited authority. Yeah. I think we need to define precisely what is limitation, because we have 4 national law as our mandate. And in national law on human rights, we have 4 functions: investigation, and then education, research, and mediation. I think this is specific mandate for Indonesian national human rights institution. I never heard that any other national human rights institution in the country has a special mandate to do mediation. And we already solving 100 cases of Indonesian agrarian conflict concern or other issues of human rights violations through the mandate of mediation. And then besides that, we still have national law on human rights code. That's National Law 26, 2000. Yeah, you also already written also in this report that Komnas HAM Pro Justisia can do investigation for the gross human rights violation. We already finished 15 files that already submitted to the General Attorney. 3 of the cases already going to the court, even though impunity is still there. It is done before my term. And now we still have 13 cases. And last week we launched another one from Aceh. So we have 14. And through the lobby to the President, to the General Attorney, and also President of Indonesia declare that they will continue 1 cases of Paniai from Papua. I think this is the progress that we have, because until 16 years, no cases going to the court. But now we start to pressure the General Attorney, and they already adopted our lobby to bring 1 case of Paniai or Papua to the court, maybe next year, could be next year. Yeah, I hope that the court on these cases also should be monitored by Komnas HAM, and also by NGOs, by media, by international also, because we don't want similar case like the last 3 cases, where the actor or perpetrators is released by the judges. But of course, we need to see also the judicial system, not only the institution of Komnas HAM, because our duty, our authority is to do pro justisia investigation, and after that submitted the result to the General Attorney. But 1 case is at least now in our term is already decided by the President of Indonesia and the General Attorney to bring to the court. And then besides that, we through that basis, also having several codes on the human rights violations done by the military. 1 case is the case of Prince of Jeremia, who killed by the military in Papua, in Tanjaya. Already brought to the court, even though it's not 100% ideal, but it is also a progressive things come from the Indonesian army, because they agree, and they agreed to bring the case to the court. And then regarding the torture, we have an MOU with the police at national and also local level. And if we compare, for instance, 2 years ago, several cases of police brutality just put to the discipline and administrative punishment. But now some cases already go to the court also, through the penal code. I think this is also the progress, where the police also comply to what our recommendation submitted to there. And of course, is also the success story of Komnas HAM, where we can convince them to bring those cases of police brutality, torture, or violences, not only in discipline mechanism or administrative mechanism, but have to go to the court as ideal mechanism. And then regarding the independency, I think I agree that now we only have one female commissioner, but this is not a sin of Komnas HAM, because a panel already brought 5 candidates. Panel is established by Komnas HAM, and after that, 14 candidates is brought to the parliament. Parliament has the authority to decide which of 14 candidates elected as a 7 commissioner. So the parliament is the problem, not the Komnas HAM, even the executive, because executive in this selection process has nothing to do with the process of commissioner Komnas HAM. Only the panel established by Komnas HAM and of course the parliament. So parliament has the final authority to decide the 7 candidates. And another point of diversity, I think you also need to read the history of the Komnas HAM. According to the national law, in one article saying that the members of, the commissioner of Komnas HAM is number of commissioner is 35. Even when we had only 13, there are fighting among them. Now we only have 7. And talking about diversity representative, I think it's not really needed for Komnas HAM. The point that the most important thing that we need is the expertise, the integrity of the commissioner. But of course, I agree with you that gender balance should be considered for the next term. But we have to say it to the parliament, not to the Komnas HAM, even to the president, because president has nothing to do with the selection process of Komnas HAM. We are really independent. We only panel process, panel selection process is formed by Komnas HAM and a parliament. And then about other, I also would like to giving you the last survey that done by the, I don't want to say the name of survey office, but this is the one of the most credible survey. According to the survey that's already launched yesterday, 88.6% of the respondents they have feel or satisfaction of the performance of Komnas HAM in helping them for getting for access to justice. So this is a question for access to justice, how they feel. And according to the survey, 88.6% has a feeling of satisfaction. So this is a survey. This is not done by Komnas HAM, but this is by independent survey organization and also very credible in Indonesia. And then when we ask, when the surveyor asking in Indonesia, West Indonesia, Mid Indonesia, and with eastern part of Indonesia, in eastern part of Indonesia, the satisfaction rate is higher, is 94.1. I don't know. This statistic is coming from surveyor, not from Komnas HAM. But in general, the satisfaction to the performance of Komnas HAM in general, that's also very high, 73. And this is the highest, the number 1 of the state institution who helping people on access to justice. So we are higher than Judicial Commission and from, of course, from other state institutions, state independent institutions. So this is the statistic that we had and already launched yesterday. And today we already launched also a press conference to the media discussing about this issue. I think this more or less my point of view to make an addition for your report. I'm not in the position to make your report is as positive or negative. I agree with this and I appreciate all this, but I would like to add something, I think some more information to enrich the report that you already had. And at regional, I think we have CNF. Yeah, I think this is also more or less is more a bit progressive now. Yeah. I know that there's a problem in one member, as a Myanmar National Human Rights Commission, but they are still following our CNF forum, and we still have very intensive discussion among the members, yeah, SUARAM, Philippines, Thailand, Indonesia, Timor-Leste, and also Myanmar, to discuss about the human rights and political situation in Myanmar. Of course, with our solidarity, because in our statute, solidarity among the members of CNF should be the one, yeah, that we have to keep. So another 5 members of CNF still give our solidarity to Myanmar, and Indonesia, Philippines, and of course SUARAM always make monitoring to situation of Myanmar. And of course, more or less, we can contribute through our MOFA. Yeah, I have a very intensive discussion with our Indonesian Minister of Foreign Affairs and her staff. And SUARAM also has a very dynamic discussion with in Malaysian PM and also Malaysian Foreign Minister. And of course, it is also done by Timor-Leste and Philippines. So through ASEAN Forum, we really would like to have a better situation for human rights and political situation in Myanmar. I think it is more or less. Another regional, we also have APF. I think APF now also is one of the regional mechanism. I think regional forum on national human rights is really a dynamic comparing to another sub-region. Thank you very much, moderator. I think it's more or less my opinion, but again, I would like to say thank you to your report, to your inputs, and also criticism to us. We are really open on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Mr. Damanik. We really appreciate it. I think it helps us also to hear NHRIs' feedback. As you know, the ANNI report is critical, but also appreciative of positive measures. And in this regard, of course, we have taken note of Komnas Ham's progression on human rights violations cases. We've documented areas where we've appreciated, for example, the SNP on human rights defenders. And we're looking forward to be working alongside you, to be giving our feedback in the coming years as well. So thank you so much for your presentation. I think we really appreciate an NHRI perspective on this as well. If you will still be around with us for a while, we will come back with a little more questions on the Indonesian context. But in the meantime, I think we'll move on to our other presenters. We've touched upon very important topics. So far, we've spoken about independence, we've spoken about the political situation, gender. I think that's a big consideration which is coming in at this stage. And in this regard, I'd like to move on to our next speaker. So this is Phil from Korea. Phil is the director of the Korean House for International Solidarity. He is also one of our ANNI members who's worked extensively on the ANNI report in the past as well. And Phil, I take this moment to start talking about some of the positive measures that the NHRCK has taken in 2020. A lot of these were also very positive for the LGBTIQ community. We've not seen a lot of NHRIs who've spoken about this as much as the NHRCK has done. So, there are some positives there when we're talking about the gender aspect, but there are some certain challenges as well. You've highlighted a case as well where, the commission had to step in, but we're seeing still a very challenging situation for gender, women, people of the LGBTIQ community in Korea. But on that note, when there are these concerns, we'd like to speak. I think we want to ask you more now about the NHRCK and specifically look at the selection and appointment process of the commission itself and how it has or has not been able to follow up on the recommendations of the country SCA. So please do share your reflections on this and your work in documenting this. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. The South Korean part of the ANNI report mainly focused on whether the recommendations of the 2016 KHIS SCA were being implemented. In May 2016, KHIS SCA re-accredited the NHRI with an A status after 3 defaults in a row. However, it recommended that ensure a consistent process is applied by a single independent selection committee. In January 2016, the NHRI Act was revised that diverse opinions and nominations be collected in the process. However, the Act only requires to hear just opinions, failing to institutionalize civil society's participation in the nomination process. No amendment to the Act has been submitted in the current National Assembly, which was formed in June 2020. In May 2018, the Presidential Office established a committee to select the NHRI chairperson. For the first time, the selection committee included members recommended by civil society. The selection committee members were composed of 3 members recommended by civil society, 3 members nominated by the Presidential Office, and 1 recommended by the Korean Bar Association. The NHRI was in charge of running the selection committee. The selection committee submitted a short list of 3 candidates to the president, and the president named Cheng, a woman movement leader from the 3 shortlist candidates. Through this process, she became the 8th chairperson of the NHRI in September 2018. Unlike the Presidential Office Selection Committee, where the NHRI had at least some members from civil society join the committee. But the selection committee established by the National Assembly and the Supreme Court did not include any members from civil society. The National Assembly and the Supreme Court went through their own nomination process without any consultation with the civil society. The primary reason why the National Assembly and Supreme Court have not formed a selection committee involving civil society is because there is no mandatory clause in the current NHRI Act. So far, this is what was covered in the 2020 ANNI report. From here on out, it happened this year. In the process of selecting the success of a chairperson Cheng, whose term expires in August 2021. Therefore, the Presidential Office again formed a selection committee where civil society participates. Civil society recommended 4 members, and a total of 9 members of the selection committee were selected, including 4 nominated by the Presidential Office through the open process of the NHRI and 1 recommended by the Korean Bar Association. After this process, former Constitutional Court Judge Mr. Song Do-hwan became new chairperson of NHRI on September 2021. This year marks the 20th anniversary of NHRI's establishment. NHRI held its 20th anniversary ceremony on November 25. The president also attended this event, and KHIS officially confirmed its NHRI rating as A status on December 1. I think it is a kind of gift for NHRI. However, KHIS SCA recommended that the NHRI legislate the single independent selection committee again this time. I would like to report that NHRI has fulfilled this recommendation in the next ANNI report. However, the outlook is negative. Finally, I thank the ANNI Secretariat. They really had a hard time making reports under difficult conditions. And I hope we can meet next year. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your reflections, Phil. I think there's been a lot of learning for us in terms of understanding how NHRIs are implementing or not implementing some of the very crucial recommendations that have come in from the Gundry SCA. As mentioned earlier, this is a periodic process of reviewing the status of NHRIs. And we do see that there is a lot of room to be working on a lot of these recommendations. I think a common theme that does run across a lot of NHRIs is independence and selection and appointment process. This is quite a challenge that has been seen across different countries in Asia over this period of time. So thank you so much for sharing your perspectives and reflections, Phil. We really appreciate your chapter. And moving on then to our final speaker for this panel. Hi, Kenneth. Kenneth is the Documentation and Monitoring Officer at Suara Rakyat Malaysia, or SUARAM. And he has worked very closely with us on the Malaysia chapter. He's drafted the Malaysia chapter. And Kenneth, this has also been an interesting year, or a difficult year on various fronts for Malaysia in terms of the political changes that have happened. We've also worked closely with our colleagues at SUHAKAM, but it's also good to hear a civil society perspective on what this situation has meant for SUHAKAM as well. We do see that SUHAKAM has undertaken positive measures during the pandemic in terms of undertaking a needs assessment of vulnerable groups. They've done advocacy on different important bills and legislations, but there is a certain amount of challenge just in terms of their independence to be implementing their mandate. And it would be great to hear from you what this means for the issues that SUHAKAM will be working on in the coming year as well. Because we do see there's a lot of economic, social, and cultural rights issues, but perhaps not as many on political rights. So please do share your thoughts on this, and we'd love to hear your reflections of having done research on this in the past year. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Shomira, and thank you for all the panelists for their wonderful presentation. I understand the challenges of being the last panelist, so I'll try to make it quick and so that we can go to the more interesting Q&A session. So I will first sum up, because since we are approaching the end of 2021, I'll first sum up what really happened in the human rights situation and things concerning to SUHAKAM, Malaysia very own Human Rights Commission. Then after that, I'll end it with some of the things that that needs to be taken note for 2021 as a way for me to suggest how things can move forward from Malaysia's perspective. I think one thing that we should note that Malaysia is kind of unique from other different Southeast Asia is that we first have a change of government before the COVID-19 pandemic. I listened to various panelists that has been talk about some of the constitutional challenges or even some of the challenges in terms of the political challenges that I heard from. It all stems from the COVID-19. But I would like to take a strong stance here is that the change of government will happen regardless of the COVID-19 during the 2020 because it was born out of the previous administration political instability. So after the change of government, less than 19 or 18 days, the new Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin, who is now the former Prime Minister, actually announced there's a lockdown. So for the entirety of the 2020, Malaysia is practically in a lockdown mode where there are severe economic and social event restrictions, where people are not allowed to go out, or even if you're allowed to go out, there's only a certain amount of time, or sometimes you can't dine out, or sometimes you can only dine out with 2 persons. So this is the environment that actually encompass 2020 for all fellow Malaysians and people that stays in Malaysia. So since then, during 2020, we have seen Malaysia has suffered setbacks with regards to individual civil and political rights, as mentioned by Shomira and Hyun-Phil. And I would like to take note that the increased use of repressive laws such as such as the notorious Sedition Act, Communication and Multimedia Act, will make a sort of like a dark return, mostly because of the political instability. If it's regardless of the COVID-19 pandemic, chances are if 2020 was all peaceful and there's no COVID-19 pandemic, we will still be seeing that there's an increase of Sedition Act and Communication and Multimedia Act because of the supposedly more conservative stance as expressed by the new Perikatan Nasional. In terms of SUARAM's performance for 2020, one thing we should be applaud, and one thing that I think is very good and has been consistently mentioned by good people from Forum Asia is in terms of defending the rights of migrants and refugees in the year 2020. I think as Malaysia was in a lockdown mode, we also, from a documentation and monitoring point of view, we also see that there's an increased sentiments increase of xenophobic sentiment. And that in some ways that was also echoed by the government because of the high-handed arrest and detention made by the Home Ministry. Having said that, it is I think we should give credit to SUARAM for coming out with press statements and even sometimes commissioner coming out with public statements that actually went against the government at that time, defending the rights of migrants and defending the rights of refugees. And in fact, the public sentiment is the whole idea of protecting migrants or getting migrants out of the country during the lockdown time was so prevalent that the hashtag for 2020 in Malaysia is called Migrant Juga Manusia. In Malay, it means migrants are also people, So in that stance, I think at that situation, at that size, I think SUARAM performed their role as a national human rights institution in a way that promoting human rights in the sense that migrants and refugees, even though in a economic restriction and in a pandemic situation, they are still human and they still enjoy the rights like all Malaysians do, So there was mention about from Shomira, there's a shift from civil and political rights. There is a shift from SUARAM from civil and political rights to economic and social and cultural rights in 2020. And that has been properly explained in the chapter that I have written. So for example, there's the need-based assessment that has been done to vulnerable communities during the lockdown, such as women, such as undocumented children in Sabah, such as migrants, such as and refugees. And so you would kind of conclude that SUARAM sort of like put more emphasis on the economic impact suffer from these vulnerable groups. I would say that rather than a shift in strategy from SUARAM, right, I think this is more inevitable in the year 2020 because as 2020, there was this lockdown in 2020, we also see that Malaysians generally has a de-emphasis of civil and political rights, and they are more concerned about job situations, unemployment issues, economic livelihood, and all this. So I would say that this is what SUARAM is doing is that while I'm not saying that they are neglecting the civil and political rights, I think it's just that responding to the general public or responding to general Malaysians of the concerns of economic and social and cultural rights, okay? So in terms of independence from executive, it's very unfortunate that some of the things that, some of the issues that SUARAM has constantly talked about, like such as lack of funding or lack of autonomy on appointing commissioners still exists because there's practically zero discussions, policy proposals, and legislative actions in 2020 to address the issue of independence from executive. These are prevalent issues that is not exclusive to a pandemic year. So given that there is a sudden change of government at the midst of health crisis, it remains to be seen what the policy of the new government with regards to SUARAM's overall independence. Even until the late end of 2021 we are having right now, we are still seeing this, we are still seeing the present government seems to be very, they are sort of like, don't take human rights issue like, they don't focus on human rights issue, more or less because it's pandemic, we need to ensure that our country is safe from this virus and all this. Having said that, it is commendable that the new government in 2020 has not reduced SUARAM's budget. This must be noted, even though the administration's coffer has clearly been stretched when the government expenditure has been drastically increased to combat the pandemic crisis. So in terms of SUARAM's capacity to address complaints through its oversight mechanism, we can see that the COVID-19 has severely affected it. So SUARAM office was forced to close its office during the MCO period and what we call the lockdown period from March 2020 to June 2020, while most of the staffs are only allowed to work from home. So because of the idea of working from home, so that's why SUARAM's complaint system is only confined to its online complaint system, and that we see that SUARAM has drastically had the complaint cases documented by SUARAM has been drastically reduced. So the restriction of movement and prohibition of interstate traveling imposed by the government in 2020 also severely curtails SUARAM's mandate to investigate human rights complaints. For instance, the public inquiry into some of the enforced disappearance case, which was scheduled to begin and finish on 2020, was forced to be suspended, and until now, we still have not heard any news from the public inquiry. Although the public inquiry has since been resumed, but the findings, according to my latest documentation, will only be announced next year. So this is about what most likely happened in 2020. So in 2021, as you guys know, in Malaysia, we have an emergency because of another round of political instability. We also seen that SUARAM was not spared from some of the more crunches from the government. So two notable incidents that I want to talk about. One notable incident I want to talk about is that during 2020, we have this huge public assembly to protest against the government's mishandling of COVID-19. So SUARAM's commissioner was there to present to monitor the assembly. So surprisingly, they were called for investigation after the assembly. They were called by police investigation. They were called by police for the investigation because of their perceived role of being as a human rights monitor to the assembly. So I think the situations are not really great even for 2021, even though the pandemic has shown signs of subsiding because of the high vaccination rate in Malaysia. So with that, I'll end and I'll happily receive any questions later. Thank you, Shomira, and thank you, Annie, again.
Thank you so much, Kenneth. I think we would love to have longer conversations. Unfortunately, time doesn't permit. But thank you so much for the snapshot of how it's been like for SUARAM as the NHRI, but also civil society in terms of the issues that can be addressed. What are the challenges that are facing the country at this point in time? And I think we can take some of the positives from it, that it is possible. It is possible. We know that there is a space for NHRIs to be advocating. It's no doubt challenging. A lot of the NHRIs work in very challenging circumstances, but there is some hope when you are seeing NHRIs step up to this challenge to speak up for the rights of refugees and migrants and to extend that to all humans. So thank you so much for your presentation, Kenneth. And I think in the interest of time, we'll move into question and answer sessions. We request our participants and everyone who's watching this, if you would like, please send in your questions. There's a question and answer box at the bottom for the participants right now in the Zoom room, but other people who are also watching, please feel free to share your questions. So I think in the meantime, while we are waiting for questions to come in, if I may, if Mr. Damanik is still around, I think we'd like to ask you about the challenges to the freedom of expression and freedom of assembly in Indonesia. The government has shown some repressive measures, and how the NHRI, you as the NHRI, are able to address this effectively in the coming time. So we'd love to hear your thoughts about that before we move on to the other panelists. Thank you.
We already launched our standard and norm and regulation. We call it as SNP, that standard, norm, and regulation on several certain human rights issues, like freedom of expression. We already launched standard and norm and regulations. And this is a guideline for all institutions, including to the law enforcement institutions like police, judges and something else. In complying the standard of human rights. This is just like a general comment in UN mechanism. And then we also launched standard and norm and regulation on land rights and natural resources. Also about freedom of religion, assembly, and something else. And now we are still drafting another issue of the standard and norm regulations. But of course, in this standard and norm, we invite or involve not only state institutions like a government, Ministry of Law, for example, but also inviting CSOs. And even some of them become a drafter in a specific issue. Yeah? So this is a common ground for Indonesian standard and norm. So we can use this as a guideline, as a common ground for everybody, every institution to follow. For example, if we talking about freedom of expression, we also discuss about the hate speech, because sometimes hate speech also involved in freedom of expression. Then law enforcement cannot divide it very well. So we write down the very clear definition what we mean as a freedom of expression, what the content and mechanism, and of course what is the hate speech and some other issue. Yeah. And then, of course, we have a very strong coordination with the police, especially to the police, and also to the some Indonesian ministries, especially to the coordinating Minister of Politics, Security, and Human and Law. Yeah? We have very good coordination. So, for instance, if we have cases, like one case in East Kalimantan, where one prisoner beaten by the police and died. We have a mandate. We have authority to call the head of the police of province of East Kalimantan to come to Komnas to be interviewed. And finally, we have a recommendation and already implemented by the chief of police East Kalimantan by bringing the case to the court for 6 policemen who beaten the one prisoner and died. And some other similar case in West Sumatra, in Java, and also one case of Indonesian reporter of Tempo in East Java. It's already brought the case to the court also because of intimidation and violence done by the police of East Java department. And of course, we need to use also media to educate not only the people, but also the Indonesian institutions, especially the government and national and local. Yeah? We also have a kind of festival of human rights. Yeah? Last month, we already finished the very famous festival of human rights in Semarang. Local leader like mayors and also chief of regency come together with some ministry, gathered in Semarang with the people also, civil society, discuss the best practices that they already done in their own local and bring to the national discussion and sharing among them. That this is one media where local leaders, government, and also civil society, local civil society can share their success story, their problem, and their obstacle, and then after that, of course, it is become a forum among them to promote and to protect human rights in their local area. That's the kind of program that we already have. Even though I know that according to the national law, there are some limitations that we have, but through the performance, through the integrity of the commissioner and also the staff, I think it helped us to solve the problem. Right now, for instance, if we call we invite the institution like the Ministry of Education to come to Komnas HAM because there is a complaint from the student organization. At least the first officer, I mean the first rank of officer of this ministry came to Komnas HAM to give clarification, and after that we give recommendation to them in order to solve the problem of the student organization who send the complaint to Komnas HAM because of some issues of human rights in their university. That's more or less example that I can say. Means that I agree with your report, but I think we need to understand more deeply, and also deeply about the context and also the dynamic, political dynamic of Indonesia, not only in national but also in local level. In Papua, for instance, there are some progress, but also there are some issues that we already handled. But now, finally, all the parties, including Indonesian Army, agreed with the proposal of Komnas HAM to negotiate with the organization of OPM, Freedom of Papua. We already submitted our proposal since 2 years ago, but last month we had agreement from the Indonesian Army and also the police to continue with the peace agreement like we had already in Aceh. I hope next year we will start from for this negotiation process. I mean political negotiation process, and trying to ask them to stop the violence, the cycle of violence, because violence is the most serious one in Papua. So this is the dynamic. There are some progress in economic, but also there is a problem in violence in some area, not all of Papua, but some area. And I visited Papua last month to some serious area like Intan Jaya, in some mountain area with my colleague from Jakarta, and also our branch office in Jayapura. They made a very serious discussion, not only to the Indonesian government, but also to the arms groups organization in some mountain area in Papua. So I think next year we hope there is a very serious peace talk in Papua. That's the dynamic. Even though there is also a problem in our national politics. There are so many objections from civil society and from people about the problem of freedom of expression, for instance, repression from the police and something else. But of course, on the other side, there is a dynamic that we can see as an opportunity for National Commission of Human Rights and other institutions to struggle with our human rights issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Damanik. I think we acknowledge that there are very challenging situations in which NHRIs are working. And I think one thing that we do take from your presentation is also the space for the NHRI and civil society to be coming together to have a consultative process and to make sure that multiple people's diverse opinions do eventually form the kind of measures that will address human rights for all in a particular national context, with all of its nuances, with all of its challenges. So thank you so much for your presentation. I think we are running a little short on time, so this would be a very brief question for our remaining panelists today from our ANNI members. If I may, I think we want to hear from you now, looking forward, now that we have this report. There have been multiple challenges as have been specified, shrinking civic space, attack on HRDs. These are serious concerns, and we're wondering what you would like to see, the NHRI in your country do to strongly address these in the coming year, and given the pandemic situation and its aftermath. So if I may, I would like to ask Dr. Sakuntala if you would like to offer your very quick, view looking forward, and then we'll move to the others. Thank you. Dr. Sakuntala, you're muted.
Because of the constraints of the pandemic and the shrinking space, overt actions may not be possible. But then if you have a Human Rights Commission that's really convinced of its mandate and committed to it, Then they could even work on education and, be part of the civil society movement to push these things to the forefront. I don't know whether that's going to happen in Sri Lanka at this point, given the composition of the, given more than the composition, given the way it is nominated, they will not have that space. But there is the civic space at this point because people are angry. And when the pandemic is badly managed, and if they find that there is corruption in the use of resources and all that, it might take another direction. But one isn't waiting for your society to implode because there are consequences of that as well. So I think we want to see an NHRI with Human Rights Commission that is really committed to the mandate of human rights and will work with civil society because they are more an agent of civil society than of government. I should have mentioned in Sri Lanka, we have another problem because even when the judiciary does make strong judgments, we have presidential pardons that are freely being used to exonerate and pardon people who've committed heinous crimes. So in this context, you really know that human rights is seriously devalued and under threat. So hard to say at this point, but I think it'll be also good to engage with the Human Rights Commission more and keep flooding them with requests, etc. That is needed for them to take action at this point.
Thank you, Dr. Sakuntala. Phil, what would be your final words for the NHRCK?
Yeah, so you mentioned NHRCK recommended for the LGBTQIs, human rights, and other minorities, including refugees and other persons. But recently, I remember 3 months ago, the trans woman, Sergeant Hyun, she suicide because she disappointed the rate process of anti-discrimination law. There are many challenges and obstacles to promote these minorities' human rights in Korea, and therefore the role of NHRC is very important. But NHRC do not have enough mandate, and also we think they do not have a strong willing to promote human rights in South Korea. Therefore, it's any activities. It's one strong outside pressure to develop the NHRC capability. Therefore, I think our network should be keep our activity and more actively play for our region more life.
Thank you so much, Phil. Thanarat, I don't know if you're still here, but if you're not, we can ask Kenneth. Kenneth, what are your final reflections? And then we can go on with Thanarat after this. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just keep it short. I think the expectation for SUARAM is to keep doing the good work that you're doing, and I would like to use this platform to also congratulate for their recent accreditation for retaining the A status, right, Shomira? Hello. Hello. Yeah, yeah.
Hi. Yes.
Yeah. So I think one thing that I would like to touch on is that I think it's a public knowledge that SUARAM has always been has some difficulties in secure funding from the government. So I think most of their budget, the entirety of their budget, also only went to the operational side, and thus they are only left with like around, if I'm not mistaken, 10 or 15% to advocate on trying to enhance their complaint mechanism or to advance human rights education or to promote human rights issue in Malaysia. So I think the challenge for SUARAM is to, just a short one, is to get more funding so that to allow the SUARAM to continue to prosper and to continue to do its good work in Malaysia. Yeah.
Thank you, Kenneth. We'll move to Thanarat, and I see that there are some questions, last-minute questions coming in. But Thanarat, if you could share your reflections, and then we'll take one or two last questions after that. So please do share your reflections for the National Human Rights Commission of Thailand in the coming year. Thank you.
Yeah, I bring my translator to answer this question.
I am Sakuntala, translator, and our point of view about NHRCT work in Thailand, we think that NHRCT should take some action about Thai protests or Thai, because Thai citizen rights continually violated by our government, and the UNHRCT never take an action about our Thai rights or Thai freedom. And most of Thai people, I should talk like this. Most of Thai people didn't know what is NHRCT. What is the main point of NHRCT or their purpose? So I think that they should take an action according to their mandate and doing their purpose to make a great right of freedom. And in Thai more than we. Yes.
Thank you so much. We lost you for a little second over there, but thank you so much for sharing your reflections. We do have questions coming in for Mr. Damanik regarding the mandates of Komnas and the process of recommendations. However, I think we're a little short on time, so please do feel free to see the question that is addressed. And I think from taking it forward from here, I think we take it in the spirit of, positive measures that can be implemented in the coming year. Things for NHRIs to consider. We encourage all of our participants, NHRIs in different countries, to do take a look at the ANNI report 2020, and to think about some of the issues that have been raised and how we can work together in the coming year for this. So thank you so much to this panel, Mr. Damanik, Dr. Sakuntala, Phil, Kenneth, and Thanarat. It has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for your work on the ANNI report. And with that, we conclude the panel discussion. I now hand to my colleague Julio to wrap up the session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shomira.
Thank you so much. That's such a great discussion. Thank you so much, Shomira, for moderating. Thank you so much, Dr. Sakuntala, Phil, Kenneth, Thanarat, and also finally, Mr. Damanik. Thank you so much for the very insightful discussion. I believe it has been very, very resourceful for all of us. And everyone, we are at the end of the launching event. So first of all, I would like again to say thank you for all of the participants, all of the ANNI members, all of the ANNI advisors as well, and also for NHRIs representatives that are present today on the launch from Komnas Pak Ahmad, Taufan, Damanik, and colleagues from Komnas who are joining from the office. Thank you so much. From our discussion today, we can agree that we see the imperative work of the NHRIs in Asia. Thus, this report on their performance that is being made and also led by civil society remain relevant. And we hope that this report in particular can be an advocacy tool for the CSOs working on NHRI advocacy, and also a reference for improvement for NHRIs in Asia. We understand that we have faced several challenges working during COVID, not only for the CSOs, but also for the NHRIs. So we would like to acknowledge that and also be very grateful of all of your work in 2020 and also moving forward this year up until also next year. We seek your cooperation and also engagement. And finally, thank you so much. We will take this chance to celebrate yet another milestone of ANNI family. In producing also and launching the ANNI report this year at the same week of the International Human Rights Day, and also for the participants for commemorating this achievement together with us at the end of 2021. So everyone, a huge round of applause for all of us, and then we conclude this discussion and also the launching. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.